My name is Nicole Preisel. I am working for the Wellberg Trust. I'm new here. I'm the new digital communications coordinator. I'm really excited to be joining all of you. I'll be doing the tech side of everything here. So if you have any questions, you can either message me directly or just put them in the chat and I'll try to answer them as best as possible. We do ask that you keep your microphones muted, and that if you do want to ask a question, if you can either type that in the chat and we'll call on you, or there's a raise your hand feature that you can also use, and then we'll try to best get that. So yeah, thank you guys all for coming, and I'm going to hand it over to Irwin to kind of open up the floor.
Thanks, Nicole.
Zoom floor.
I just want to welcome folks as well. My name is Irwin Oostindie. I'm a Dutch settler here. I grew up in North Vancouver in Slahal and Squamish land. And just want to acknowledge my co-host, Cease Weiss. She is not with us this morning. She is attending the funeral of Peter Oleski up in Lillooet this morning. So just sharing thoughts with on behalf of all of us to Cease, and if we can keep her in our hearts, and the family of Peter Oleski, who perished in the forest in Lillooet a couple of weeks ago. So we also want to acknowledge that probably a lot of us haven't slept a lot. This is in the Heart of the City Festival proposed this date right after the US election. We probably should have known better, but here we are. With one eye on the television and one eye in the Zoom room, and just know that we're all in the same canoe together, and that yeah, there's lots of waves around us, and it's a bit of a crazy time. The schedule today is we're picking up from Wednesday's session. Again, this is Zoom, right? So we're not together, we're not sharing tea, we're not sitting together face to face. We're making as best as we can. And the intent was to split this up so we'd have one session on Wednesday to kind of backtrack, and we're grateful to hear Ronnie's voice, David Eng's voice, and have folks meet each other. There's a lot of power in this room. I want to acknowledge that. There's a lot of people who work on this day in, day out, in their arts organizations, in their museums, doing cultural policy advocacy. There's working artists. So just want to acknowledge that there's a lot of expertise in the room. So we're really going to try to focus as much as we can on the group time, so that you can meet each other, build relationships. We'll start talking about Coast Salish presence on the land, and then we'll move into some case studies, in particular looking at the importance of doing work that's difficult, and how do we support each other doing that difficult work. And always keeping in mind that there's different ways to approach the work, right? There's the personal work. We've learned in the last few years that a lot of folks have, they're learning about colonialism, they're learning about their own location, they're learning about their own identity, they're learning about their own ancestors. And so that's personal work that really has to happen before you can change your organization or decolonize your organization. And we're really talking about decolonization and redress. We're not per se talking about reconciliation. So, and I know we did a poll question last time, and a lot of folks said, I'm not exactly sure yet what the difference between reconciliation and redress is. So let's just keep trying to answer that today. And we'll also give it, the last group conversation we'll have is really about the sector, like us together. I was reminded watching the video from last year and thinking about how many years we've been talking about these issues of inclusion, right? 30 years of inclusion talk from the BC arts sector. And first it was people of color, now it's Indigenous. It's at some point we're doing window dressing and diversity training, but we're actually not changing the structures. So excuse my pointedness, my frankness, but really that's what the emphasis is today, is how can we bring change? And so we thought to bring a bit of time so we can actually talk about that as a sector. So not just, hey, what can my group do, or what can I do in my own family, but what can I do with my peers in the arts sector? And of course, the importance of redress is that we're actually talking about the land. We're talking about the buildings. Ronnie talked about that last in his video, in his words about build the spaces, give the spaces to the Coast Salish artists, and then leave, right? So that was a provocative, important point that Ronnie made, is like, again, we're not talking about gestures, we're talking about structures, we're talking about assets, resources. And the importance of that, of course, is that the federalism, reconciliation is a federal project, right? Reconciliation works against, in my opinion, works against Coast Salish sovereignty. It works against the Indigenous folks where they're at in their communities, because it always is promoting Canadian Indigenous people. Our, you know, when you hear the dangerous word of our natives, right? So we're talking about disrupting that, and Canada Council needs to be disrupted, right? Because almost all of the Indigenous funding and the non-Indigenous funding coming into Vancouver does not go to Coast Salish artists, right? An extreme level, more than 99% of the Canada Council funding does not go to Indigenous artists from the land here in Vancouver. So let's disrupt that, because that can't continue if we expect our brothers and sisters who are Coast Salish working artists to have the renaissance that they deserve. And we did talk briefly, I just want to cover this again. There's a lot of confusion sometimes, and there's competing politics, and there's band councils, and there's communities, there's Coast Salish, there's language groups, there's economic initiatives like MST. So let's be clear and open-minded and keep learning about what language you're using and try to be as specific as possible. And let's locate our own positionality, right? Like, I don't identify as an ally. And I look to Cleve Benally's words on that. You know, I'm interested in working side by side, shoulder to shoulder with my brothers and sisters who are Coast Salish, Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, Katzie, Kwantlen, Wanak, and in their liberation, in their resourcing, in their lives being better, my life will be better. And I don't want to do that as a bystander. I don't want to do that as an observer, as someone who's passive, nor do I want to do it as an ally. I want to actually be in the trenches. And so it's not, and that's just my own self. I'm not arguing for anyone to be doing anything in a particular way. I think that's for you to inventory for yourself. But I think that's something that Cleve Benally challenges us to think about. And without any further ado, I want to just quickly play a video from Kattie Coolidge, and she is a Tsleil-Waututh, a young artist, and just play that. It's a Children of Takaya video.
Spirit of Slahal, Shway Slahal. And the Slahal is a bone game, hand game, stick game, and it's played with two bones the size of your hand. You can seal them in your hand, one's marked and the other's plain. And the object is to guess the unmarked bone. If you guess right, then you hand the bones over to the other team. And whoever is holding the bones will be singing a song. So when you see the dance tonight, you'll see in the dancers, the movements, they'll be spinning, trying to confuse you so you don't know which hand the unmarked bone is in. They'll be pointing, and they'll holler and stuff, and it's all to throw you off, to distract you. So we give you the spirit of Slahal.
Okay, and that film came about through the resources being made by the Forum Festival to Katie. And a benefit of that was that the children of Takaya could then have a video to then circulate for their own selves. Right? So children of Takaya didn't have their own video, worked with Katie, worked with Video In, and that was how that came about. So it just shows that ripple effect of when work is done, it actually has these additional benefits around cultural infrastructure. And Ronnie, actually, you were involved in that residency at Video In at the time. A lot of your work involves research. You're a foremost researcher around these lands, but also as a working artist, we've heard you speak about the kind of neo-gentrification that Coast Salish artists are experiencing, and how challenging that is to kind of continue the work of putting the face of Coast Salish peoples on the lands here. Can you speak to that for a few minutes and help frame that?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's been a steady kind of movement of erasure of indigenous culture, Salish cultures here. I would say in Vancouver, but all the way from here through up to Yale, I guess. The invisibility of the Halkomelem language and cosmology and cultures, and the ones surrounding, as well as Squamish and the Nooksack cultures. You know, we've had a steady movement here in the city. So through some of the research when I did the New Forms thing was based on a paper written by Gene Barman. Wrote a paper called The Erasure of Indigenous Indigeneity in Vancouver, and it spoke to the story of the removal of the Kitsilano Reserve and the removal of the Squamish reserves in Stanley Park. Those are stories I had heard about a long time, and I even went on some of the walking tours with Gene Barman, and like just to kind of understand it. I think that knowledge of that history is important to where we're going, and I think that recognizing and acknowledging the movement that erasure of indigenous culture here has had on the financial real estate industry, the economy here, needs to be recognized. You know, where the mythologies of control that exist that I work with a lot is like, number one is that tax dollars pay for indigenous lives to exist, which is an utter falsity. It's the most untrue thing, and it separates us and creates a divide between indigenous people and non-indigenous people. As soon as you meet an indigenous person, you think that we're in debt to you. And so these are mythologies of control that exist in the dominant narrative, and that's by creating and erasing the cosmology cultures and also the historiographies that exist here, and replacing them with a safe, washed story that can be marketed and sold in gift shops downtown. And so the problem with that is that we have living descendants of people that are still carrying these stories in our oral tradition. 1808 isn't that far away. 1808 for us is a couple lifetimes. But they want to make the narrative, the dominant narrative, be that our histories are so far from us and we're so far removed. We're not. And so for me in research, it started in arts, really. I was doing a project with Full Circle, and it was to research Pauline Johnson. I had known a little bit about her and was like, okay. So I dove into it and found out about her relationship with Sapluk, aka Joe Capilano. And in that was place names that were in the story, and recognizing that there is original place names that have been recorded and exist. And then finding more place names and stories, cosmologies, and kind of spiraling away from Vancouver out towards where all my grandmothers are from, and trying to have a deeper understanding of how they saw the land and what the names were, what it was in the language, so to re-understand that kinship. And so now my job right now, I'm at the Massey Theater, working as a cultural researcher and programmer, and I'm on an unsettlement movement out here in the oldest settlement here in British Columbia, is to dig up everything I know about who was here, and working with the descendants to tell those stories. And so my job right now is to gather. Next week, I'm meeting with my aunties and uncles from Musqueam and Coquitlam and Catesy. I'm going to show them the research materials and the assets that are available, and then ask them, what do you want to do with this? What stories do you want to tell? And how do you want to tell them? And then we gather that bundle up and we take it to the young artists in the community or artists in the community and go tell these stories. Auntie said she wants this told this way. Uncle wants this way, and disseminate that work to the community. New Westminster for me, like I worked in Vancouver for a long time, and I moved to New West years ago and started working with Massey Theatre. And when you move somewhere, like for me, when I move somewhere, I want to understand that place to the utmost. What was the place name? What was the ecosystem like? What sacred events happened in those spaces so that I could interact with that? And what's lacking for us as young people is that lens of understanding of our cosmology. The rest of the world has sacred ancient scripture that they can look at as this lens towards reality. They can look at these ancient values that they can check back on. We don't have that. It's been disrupted in our oral tradition. And so for me, let's gather these stories and start telling them in a new way. Even down to the point of like, how do we introduce characters like Coyote, the Transformers, Mink, as characters into kids' books, so that we start with this introductory level of like moving up in graduation of this re-understanding of our stories that are connected to the land, that are connected to the rock formations that are here. The place names have a distinct characteristic of the interaction with the biodiversity in that area. And so we're working with the people in New West here of a plan for reassessing what biodiversity is needed in this city to survive, but also like, don't forget us, the Native people who are like doing the research of understanding what our ancestors saw it as. And so as an artist for me, I told this last night. It's like I came to a point in my life where I was like, I'm a Native rapper, and I'm like the voice of my people, and I was really feeling myself for a bit. Then I asked myself, like, am I the voice of my people? Have I even listened to my people? And if I've listened to my people, have I listened to the land and the ancestors? And so, research is going to be my offering, I hope, back when I leave and go back to the earth or in the water to the sky. I just want this bundle of understanding to be accessible and to be able to be activated. And I told a story yesterday about Swanaset and his marriage to the princess of the Sakai people, and how that made this bond in Katzie with the Sakai, and it brought the Sakai there. In that turn, there was a relationship that was recognized to the point where when the first Sakai came into the Katzie area, everybody stopped working. Everybody stopped fishing. Everybody stopped hunting. Even the kids would put down their toys so as not to distract the salmon babies from going to where they're going to go because of this ancient sacred relationship. Yeah. And so this happened since time immemorial. But this is also a basic principle that has been extrapolated and codified into the Sparrow versus Queen case. And so that ancient relationship is the underlying, our ancient connection to salmon. And so being able to find and extrapolate these legal principles and values and codify them is part of this next work in these unceded territories towards nationhood, towards sovereignty, and towards land back. And if we want to make it parallel, we should be talking land back and sovereignty in terms of the arts industry, the music industry, and our own cultural sovereignty. And so what is land back for arts? It's giving us space. It's giving us stages. It's giving us a liquor license and going away, like I said. It's giving us the space to be able to build. And so the project out here we're working on right now at Massey Theatre is to take over the old New Westminster secondary facilities, which will be in January. And we're working on creating a concept to make this an Indigenous gathering, resource, performative research space where we can. I'm trying to work with the concept that I learned from an elder named Annie York, and it's an Inca book, and it's called Zoich or Zozoich, which is like where you go to when you work on something to get stronger at it. Zozoich is when a community or a lot of people work on something to be stronger at it. So I'm trying to find some Halkamelum parallel concepts to that, like a place where we go to be stronger, where we go to make our oral tradition stronger, where we go to make our stories stronger, where we go to make our understanding stronger together. And so this idea of taking space it's happening out here. slowly but surely. And so the idea is to have that, and really literally getting my aunties in on it and asking them, what do you want me to do? And so, I mean, that's where I'm at right now. I think the land back and art space back to me is parallel, and those concepts of sovereignty can be doubled. And we're working on it right now with the Indigenous Music Office in terms of understanding and trying to spread the gospel of an Indigenous music sovereignty, free from the corporate industries, and giving our own space, creating regenerative economies between the cities and between the buyers, the sellers, the people who service, and making sure that music is ours and owned. And so I think we have to have that same conversation with arts and space as well. And you know, there's work out there happening with it, and we just have to like learn to like get out of the survival mode of arts administration and sort of get into the building strategy and capacity. And so just know I'm out here in New West dorking out, trying to figure it out. Thank you.
Powerful words. And you're really talking about the political economy. You're talking about the economics and power in many ways, because I think that, if I may, I think that's really what sovereignty is about, right? Not having these federal top-down token arrangements built on the foundation of Canada, but actually saying this is unceded lands. And how, you know, this room is full of executive directors, arts directors, museum directors. What would you say to folk who are trying to support or resource that work that you're talking about?
Yeah.
Like?
I want to shout out to Patricia Huntsman, who brought out like these numbers. I was at a conference talking about how digital media and arts brings in way more money than the extractive resource industries in British Columbia and Canada. And so we really need to look at leveraging and understanding our position and what economic viability we bring into the arts industry and also to the economy here. Okay, this is Hollywood North, right? And if we look at it in terms of land back, we're 5% of the population living on 0.2% of the land. But how much percentage of the Canadian identity in media and tourism and branding and identity stuff do we exist in? I would say it's more than 0.2%. I would say Indigenous culture brings people to Canada at a 30% to maybe more rate. I would have to find statistics on that, but we need to leverage that and understand our equity in this landscape. And unfortunately, because we're arts folks, we don't really think like that. We don't think in these numbers and these business numbers. Myself, I never thought about publishing or rights or anything. I was just busy trying to write rap for 30 years. You know what I mean? But what we're looking at now is like, how do we set up artists and we set up organizations in terms of sovereignty? Sovereignty cannot be assumed. It has to be asserted. There's long work of paperwork and design and capacity to build. And I really am looking at like, what's the long work we're going to create for now? The work we did at W2 was building artists in a long work. So we're going to do 5-year plans of building artists, bringing in big artists, building young artists around it and trying to build that up. Unfortunately, we didn't have the amount of space nor a liquor license to really take a foothold economically into that scene, because we're competing with people like Fortune Sound Club, who has like liquor sponsorships and mass promotional budgets. That's the nature of doing business in Vancouver, is you're working for the landlords, whoever owns the stage and the liquor license. And it sucks because you can't really talk about liquor in Indigenous arts, but it's a huge part of it's a huge part of the economic model, unfortunately, until we shift that more towards food and really look at how we seat people and disseminate arts, I think. And so I like constantly thinking about how are we going to reshape it, and especially in the COVID area. We're looking at building an outdoor gathering space now, right? We're looking at raising capacity for streaming facilities so that, you know, uncle's band from the Fraser Canyon can come and play and stream and not have to worry about it. Or if Auntie wants to do a weaving lesson and she could stream it, not have to worry, we'll have text there and the technology. And I think for us is like, if we raise that capacity for artists, all of us are going to succeed, right? So that's what I've been thinking about a lot in the last days, is like, how do we really activate space to give it back to people who might not have that access? And I mean, that was a sort of work we were doing, but we're really up against the economic model and the pressures of capitalism in a city. And, you know, so hopefully we could take some space to alleviate that for some people.
And that's the complicated thing with you mentioned the W-2 model, which was the community amenity benefits agreements that the city was doing. So we were a project that was trying to access space through the real estate industry. You know, so West Bank really was not an ally of community, and in fact the community was actually a threat to the developer there. So the community lost on that one. Thank you for those sharp shooting words to get us started. Kamala, do you want to jump in? And you do work, you know, you do work similar. Ronnie was talking really about land-based knowledge, and you've done a lot of work as a filmmaker and as an urban planner, sometimes quietly in the background and sometimes kind of at the forefront, pushing change in city government. Can you share some thoughts?
Sure. Yeah, I would like to just situate myself. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Speaking to you today from the beautiful cedar-filled coastal area of Squamish and Slahal territories. I'm over at our house in Gibsons right now. I was born and raised throughout this whole area in Coast Salish territories of many different nations. My own ancestors are Korean Métis and Eastern European. So through the histories of displacement and my mom's own desire to flee the racism of Edmonton, I have not grown up connected to or knowing very much about my own ancestral homelands. I don't speak the language that my grandfather spoke and didn't pass on to his children, the Cree language. So I'm doing my best, you know, having grown up here in this place that is the only home I've ever known, and where my children are growing up as well. And so what I do to show my gratitude and to practice my teachings of reciprocity is I'm continuously thinking about what it means to live on someone else's lands, my responsibilities on these lands, and to just continue carrying all of these incredible gifts of teachings and stories that have been given to me and shared with me, not for me to own, but to carry and share in my own ways. And so, yes, I've discovered that a really important area of work in trying to undo the damages and ongoing harms of colonization is through city government and also through film. So I actually combine those things. So I'm happy to talk about some specifics, but I just want to share just some reflections that are with me now and that might be helpful for people who also are not of these lands to think about in terms of our responsibilities. Generally speaking, I think it's really good to continuously reflect on, you know, where we are in this time and space. What is your own story of place, your own story of arrival here, or your own connections to these lands, and how you understand that, how you know your place here, how you know these lands, and how you are contributing to or helping to dismantle the very rigid and loud and glassy and shiny narrative of Vancouver, which has been the target and the focus of my work for many years in terms of the dominant narrative and the myth of this place. It's a construct. The idea of Vancouver is a construct. It's an imagined place that's been imposed onto Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh lands. The idea of the map and the boundaries and the naming and the streets and the whole design of the place has really built up this myth that this is a place that was founded by the Great White Fathers, that they are the caretakers of this place, and the rest of us, you know, just try to find our place in here. And so we're constantly working against that. Because even ideas of reconciliation, even ideas about inclusion are always still about adding to this sort of understood default culture of what Vancouver is. And so I encourage people to think about, how are you upholding that idea and the harms that it causes and the erasure that it causes? How are you deconstructing and learning what the stories of these lands are? And so in my film work, it's been all about listening to and sharing stories from people who have always lived here, and trying to remind the rest of us that there are languages here, and all of the important things that Ronnie shared around the citizens. Who are the citizens of this place? Where are they in the stories? And the idea that the stories of sockeye and mink and coyote and wolf and orca, all of those beings, all of those people are citizens of this place. And the newcomers, not knowing or appreciating and not respecting the laws of this place, have ignored that, and we are in this situation we're in now. But yet in my work as a planner, I continue to see these are neo-colonial wave after neo-colonial wave, or just colonial, let's just call it colonial, it's all the same thing, of, oh, now we need to make a sustainable city. Okay, what are our principles? What are the teachings around that? How are we going to do that? And it's still about overwriting, and it's still this idea that somehow we're starting from scratch, or that it's the dominant white culture that shapes that form of knowledge, that shapes what a green city looks like. And there still is not this deep deconstruction and questioning of the teachings of sustainability, the teachings of caring for these lands, and the laws, the original laws of this place, that's what we're supposed to be living by and respecting and following. And so anything that doesn't go to that point is just replicating the same dominant culture and mythology. And Ronnie started by sharing the craziness going on to the south of us, and then also this morning I got all triggered by an article about a book by Michael Kleckner, the guy who writes all of these romantic, nostalgic books about the old heritage houses in Vancouver, and he's this historical buff, and he too is holding up this idea of Vancouver, this construct, as if that's what this place is. And never have I heard him question the damage that was done to the ancient cultural heritage and continuous cultural heritage of the rights and title holders of these lands. And at the very same, it's the idea of America. As people are fighting and upholding and defending their idea of America, it's the same thing. It's this construct, it's a myth, and it's been imposed on Indigenous lands, but we're not even near the place where anybody can even question that. Like, it's been so deeply entrenched that right now it's even just about, rights and freedom from violence and racism and all of that. But meanwhile, there's these other truths that are not even coming up in conversation yet. So I see them as parallel in terms of just how embedded and normalized these visions and images of places like Vancouver become, and that's what we're up against. And so for those of you who are in the position of being able to either support or produce knowledge and culture, think about that privilege and think about, how are people who have always lived and cared for these lands able to and supported to tell their stories, to create arts and culture, when, as Ronnie said the other day, we're just trying to survive. People are just trying to survive. People are continuously under siege. Their lands and waters are continuously under siege. So in addition to looking at Coast Salish representation and support within your own organizations and institutions, I also encourage you as individuals to think about how you are supporting the local rights and title holders to be able to produce, to create, to tell stories, and to be free from the continuous violence and that constant need to be protecting the land. If people could just wake up a day and not have to feel like they have to fight continuously just to keep their waters clean, it would be a really good day. And so I think all of us who live here have a responsibility to support that work, in addition to any arts and culture work that we might do as part of our jobs. Hi.
And should we just jump into our first breakout?
We had a really awesome time a few days ago. People were like really love the breakout rooms. And so we're gonna try to increase the time a little bit. Yeah, perfect. Okay. I'm gonna open the rooms. Is that good, Irwin?
You bet. Let's do it.
Perfect.
Let's dive in.
You can message me privately. And yeah, so, but I hope you guys all had a good time. I popped into two. I didn't have time to pop into other ones, but it looks like everyone's having pretty good discussions. I was too, for a while.
Volunteer for the first report back. We've got about 10 minutes for the report back.
Nice.
Jump in and share some of the lessons on how we can do place-based redress in our organizations.
I'm happy to go first for our group, if everyone's in my group's okay with that.
Thanks, Karen.
Yeah, so there was about 4 or 5 of us, and we talked about Ronnie shared place names as a way of bringing back presence on the land, and shared some examples from his work in New West, Sapperton area. Others shared that work in arts and culture and programming around a focus on paid work and honorariums for artists, and needing to work through bureaucratic administrative processes to make that easier to do, as well as like artists in residence, so having carvers or weavers, the examples from Britannia Community Center in East Van. And as well, ideas around like breaking down barriers to promote space for artists, whether it's indoor or kind of outdoor public space. And then others shared that they're kind of just taking ideas from the discussion to take them back to their own cultural centers and cultural organizations of a way of bringing people together, and so promoting Coast Salish culture within their own kind of Jewish cultural programming. So those are a few from our group.
Thank you, Kara. And Leanne and I often talk about that, getting out of that scarcity mentality, because we've been so used to the scarce budgets and tiny budgets, and trying to wrap our heads around our own decades of practices around that, and shaking that free and going, okay, well, actually, we can't do this anymore. We have to properly budget proper fees. And I think, it's as much a self-criticism that we doing this work requires actual budgets. We should be freeing up our Coast Salish brothers and sisters to actually do work on this and pay them well, and really inventory our own kind of scarcity habits. Someone else, please.
I can go next for our group. So there's a few different perspectives. So there was one person who worked in an art gallery in a heritage building. So the thing about that is to kind of contextualize the history of such like institutions. So making it visible and clear how buildings like that or institutions have contributed to erasure of the local Indigenous peoples in the past, and also providing artists and residencies for such galleries and organizations. Another perspective was as an individual artist, is when you get funding from kind of larger agencies, how approaching Indigenous artists and kind of sharing them to make art and make projects like that, and just developing relationships. Yeah, if anyone from my group wants to add on to that, feel free.
I can speak from our group. Of course, Mickey, Sonia, Scott, and Darcy are welcome to jump in too, in case I miss anything. Sonia spoke to her when she was with Burnaby Village Museum, how they had employed Indigenous educators and how they ran into problems around colonial requirements like criminal record checks and social insurance numbers, and how they supported those Indigenous educators in speaking directly to their HR community, their department, and that it hasn't necessarily made a huge change yet, because change is slow in some of these colonial constructs, but at least the work has begun. Mickey was talking about her position as a postdoc student at UBC, and just sitting in as a non-Indigenous person at some of the Indigenous solidarity groups, just trying to figure out, you know, why isn't there any mention of UBC being on stolen land? Where's the leadership from the local, in particular Musqueam? And so she is just trying to kind of raise some of those issues. And we also touched on the whole real estate of universities. Speaking of giving land back, and
Scott, can I add to that?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm Mickey. Hi. No, it wasn't solidarity meetings, but it was the Indigenous strategic plan sessions where UBC is trying to present itself as at the forefront of respecting the UN DRIP and all these like things. So yeah, but of course they are not. It's just a hollow gesture. Sorry to interrupt you, Leanne.
It's good to clarify. Thank you. And then Scott is with the Canadian Actors Equity Association. So how are they doing things differently? I think it's a 23-person council, of which I think 2 or 3 it's regionally based, and how those members are invited or voted in, and how the organization is structured, and they have an Indigenous advisory group as well. So, but Scott, if you want to mention anything else. And then of course I spoke from my perspective at Wildbird Trust and the work that we're doing to redress and repair relations with Tsleil-Waututh on many levels, on the board level, staffing, resources to artists, access to our nature house, etc.
Hi, yeah, Leanne, thank you very much. I just wanted to add one other thing we've had as a real takeaway this year in our National Council was an education we had about Indigenous principles of governance, and how that has really changed how we come to decision-making, how we move through our decision-making processes. It's been very, very helpful and valuable for us. And I encourage anybody who's in charge of an organization on the governance side of their organization to look into that. And we used a group called Naheowin in Edmonton, out of Edmonton, run by Hunter and Jacqueline Cardinal. Thank you.
Another person? We got a couple minutes left.
I can report back from
Please.
Group 4. I'm Heidi, and there was, I think there was some interesting confusion about how to respond to the question, partly because our group had Charlene from the Squamish Nation and Megan from Tsleil-Waututh in the group. So there was a shared feeling that the presence is here. So, you know, what is a settler organization's role in relationship to that versus the nation's roles in their own living agency, just doing what they do. I think that Charlene brought up a lot of questions that were really relevant around education and relationship, and how can we redress wrongs with people that we don't know. So that looking foundationally at, you know, what does it mean to create space for people who are already here, and to just really, I think we were trying to reframe that question, but certainly knowledge of history and thinking about the long-term nature of relationship and how that conflicts with the colonial funding structures that we're all subject to. So for instance, Jennifer was talking about just beginning a relationship with Andrea Grant on a project around water, that is going to be a multi-year relationship, but that doesn't fit into the funding structures that will support that relationship. So how do we advocate back to fundraisers, to our funders, that the colonial structures actually are barriers for right relationship between settler and Indigenous collaborative projects. And also from Caroline, working within civic structure, within parks board structure, again, identifying the structures that aren't there to support embodied experience, and how that creates barriers between our relationship to the people and the land. I was also reflecting just back at some of the ideas that I think Ronnie had made suggestions of in the first feedback around bringing visibility of place names into our building, and also doing more foundational relational work with the nations for small groups of organizations, because I'm a part of a production center that has 8 different companies. So do we need 8 different companies to all be doing this work individually, or can we create more meaningful relationship by trying to bring those resources together, which I think you're talking about, Irwin, around being able to compensate the artists who are leading in this work properly, that we need to think laterally about how to bring those resources together in order to invest in long-term relationship. Did I miss anything, team number 4?
I am excited about this thing. I have worked in the Bronx for 20 years. That is part of my background. The Bronx taught me well, that is for sure. And so it's been very interesting for me, because I'm East Coast, and so the West Coast has been like a big learning curve. And I've only been there here in Vancouver 2 years, which is like a millisecond in the life of time immemorial. It's like I'm a ghost already. But yeah, but it's been really exciting, honestly, I'm just trying to bring all the information I'm learning back to different artists who are Indigenous and also Latina and like a bunch of other things. And so that it's part of their background, it's part of their history, but because it's like, am I Boricua, am I Puerto Rican first, am I this first? But bringing in the Indigenous into their conversations has really brought that up. So, and with that, I've been able to have some fun and bring some artists from BC to connect with the artists in the Bronx. And really, it's been very exciting to see things that have changed within. And last thing to say, for example, though, I've seen these 2 artists work for 15, 20 years. I know their work, but we did a residency online that had a showing at the end. But suddenly when their work was framed by, this is an Indigenous framing, it changed. They were so nervous, and it's like, it was a different way to experience their work. Thank you.
Thank you.
The sort of prevailing part of the conversation was really creating opportunities for emerging artists that are specific to specific territories. And an example of that, what happened in Richmond in terms of really digging in deep to put out a call to artists from Musqueam. There were not so many there, but then that actually prevails upon everybody to dig in deeper. Hello?
Go ahead.
Okay, it prevails upon all of us to follow, what Ronnie was talking about is actually talking to the aunties first, to really dig deep to find those opportunities. There are suggestions that to bring in emerging artists that may need some help is to bring other Indigenous artists to mentor them. They may not necessarily be as place-based specifically, but that is one strategy around that. And just looking at the kind of structures that people in sort of public institutions are dealing with immigrants coming to the country, and they're always talking about learning the language, being English or French, the dominance of that, and that there's a real opportunity to break that silo, to start looking at local territory languages. The other great idea. I heard somebody representing an orchestral organization is to turf the playing of "O Canada" at the beginning of all their concerts, and to replace that with music that is actually specific to the territory.
And just a reminder, the question we had up was place-based redress. So the question of like really centering the work where we are. So really thinking geographically, because it really helps disrupt the reconciliation stuff, right? Reconciliation is this like big federalist project. Yes, it's about connecting with your neighbors and learning about them. But at the end of the day, how do we actually use our institutional powers through our assets, through our programs, through our budgets, through our hiring practices, through our economies? How do we apply those to change the economic relationship, the power relationship, to increase the presence of Coast Salish on the land? We're going to show a video now, and then we're going to come back and talk about some case studies. This is about public space, right? So this is going to get difficult because we're really talking about the violence of colonialism as it manifests itself on the land. We'll first look at the Gassy Jack sculpture, and then we'll look at some other examples that some of you have been involved in.
Pizza Putwilam Atanash Masguimos Hamoch Tanawel. I Kunishqualo and Squinziquits Nala. Schamtanot Kunisqui Tanitsent Homasquium. We got here to what is now known as Vancouver through an ongoing and horrific colonization and genocide of what is still my ancestors' land, of what is still sacred land. Connecting the dots between what happens to the land happened to my women first. All across Turtle Island, the women have been modified, we have been dehumanized, we have been hypersexualized, and we are hunted, we are murdered. And this is connected to Gassy Jack because he ran a bar that catered to the loggers and the other men who were here doing the work that destroyed and removed the trees and my ancestors' spaces, that catered to the men who violated my women. And Gassy Jack himself, married to a First Nations woman whose name is erased, deleted, forgotten, yet his name is here on land that was never his. Gassy Jack is connected to murdered and missing Indigenous women, to colonization, to gentrification, to the destruction of a culture that was so beautiful and proud and powerful that since the first sunrise for well over 10,000 years, we stood and loved and cared for this land. When you look at the fact that our land has been destroyed to gain access to fossil fuels that aren't even necessary anymore. Our women are being kidnapped and stolen and shipped around the world, just like our logs and our water and our air. It's just another commodity. The only future that I'm working towards is a future where we are safe, where we are empowered, where we are connected, and we work together in ways that benefit everybody. That is a completely different system than what we have been forced to live under for the last couple hundred years here. The future I'm working towards, the future I'm creating, I'm not sitting back waiting for anyone to do the work. I'm doing my work. I'm doing the work that my ancestors put me here to do. Our number one job is to heal ourselves first. Start doing your work. Start healing yourself. And what you learn and what you find, share it. Empower the women around you. Find respectful ways to work together and honor each other and support the good work you do together. Gassy Jack's statue, still standing there, commemorates and celebrates the ongoing devastation of First Nations people, our laws, our lands, our rights, and mostly our women. When I see that statue there, it enrages me. It offends me. It insults me. It hurts me. And it motivates me to keep doing what I have to do to reclaim, to be another one of those red women rising.
just want to say, I don't know why I've noticed in that film they don't credit Audrey Siegl, so I think it's just really important to acknowledge that that was Audrey Siegl from Musqueam who was speaking.
So we have our next guest on the telephone now, and it's Ta'a, Amy George. So I just want to welcome Ta'a. Thanks for spending a bit of time with us. And I know you're at Tsleil-Waututh, and there's with COVID, we're not able to see you, and we're not able to sit in your porch and talk together. So I just want to thank you for reaching out to us on the telephone. And we've just been talking to about the importance of the presence on the land, and Ronnie was talking about that in terms of acknowledging the cosmology, acknowledging the history, the ancestors, the language on the land, and Kamala was talking about working within the city government and helping arts organizations try to get more presence of Coast Salish people on the land. Why, in your experience, I know you worked with Rachel George on the Granddaughters mural for Stanley Park, and that was an attempt to get your face, literally your face, and elders' faces on the land in Stanley Park. Why is it important to show the face of Tsleil-Waututh and your ancestors on the land, given so much with colonialism is happening in Vancouver?
I think on one of my dad's soliloquies, he said that it is the government's intention to have us wiped out and being invisible. And so he said it's been that way since contact. We're like in a fog and we're not really present, but we are present. We've survived residential schools, we survived smallpox blankets, we survived outward murder, and so many people have the wrong idea about us. We're a small group. We're only what are we, 4% or something, and we have the highest population in jails, the highest incident of infant deaths. We have representative of downtown East Side, people with that are homeless, and all of this is it's not publicized. It's not in front of the public. It's just time for us to say that we're still here and we exist. And the mural was one of the things that the artist had an idea of putting our story out on those murals. And then we were told that the woman who is running Stanley Park, the art part, I guess, she said that we look too alien. That's because people never see us or hear about us. Our true history has never been told. It's not in any of the textbooks. All the horrors that my ancestors have lived through, and not only my ancestors, like I lived through it. I lived through residential school. And I think it's about time students and people in Canada find out what we have lived through. That we have. It's not even living through it. It's surviving it. Surviving murder and imprisonment. I was in prison when I turned 6 in residential school. It wasn't a place to go and learn. It was, we were literally prisons. We couldn't step outside the high walls. if we stepped out, the police were called, RCMP would come and put us back inside the big fences. And we were treated like prisoners when I was age 6. It seems when the pipelines and the mega oil tankers, when there was talk about putting it through our inlet and sending those oil tankers through the Salish Seas, people started to say, well, we need some Indians here. We need some Native representatives. And it seems like when BC kind of got in trouble, we were finally needed for something. And that seems to have passed. For a few minutes, they were saying, oh, we need to call them and have them, the 3 tribes represented, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam. And it's about time people know the absolute truth about our history, because it's only the history in textbooks and in every way, it's only representing the white European people. It's their version of history where so many people are surprised that we even exist still. And we got a lot to say.
Mm-hmm.
We've got some good teachings, especially about the land and one another. We've got something to offer. Everyone that comes in, is born into this world, comes with a gift. And we've been ignored way too long. Like even in America, I think America is important to me because my dad taught me that we're all part of one another on Turtle Island. And I've seen them meet with other chiefs, seen an Apache chief, and they held arms, their forearms, they put it together, which used to be our handshake. And he said, no matter how far away from me you live, chief, we're brothers. And we recognize that across Turtle Island. And on CNN News, the representatives of the peoples of America, like the whites is like 43, the blacks is like a certain number, and then right on national TV it said something else,
mm-hmm.
which was us.
Yeah.
And so we look at it right away, like people look at it with humor, like I'm something else.
You are something else, Ta'a.
I am a proud something else. And so we took it with humor, but some of my people said, I mean, when is it time to say enough is enough?
Mm-hmm.
And for the 2 European countries, Canada and America, that's their governments, the white governments, to say that, to name us, to say Native North Americans or something. It's not someone else, it's something else. And that's such a big message to the world. And to think in this day and age that this is how we're represented, of how we're thought of.
Mm-hmm.
That's so totally wrong.
Ta'a, we were showing, while you were talking, I was showing the pictures from the granddaughter's mural, and I know Melanie Shambach, the lead artist, is on the call as well. That featured Sonaquila with Audrey Rivers, who's now passed on to the spirit world.
Yeah, that's it.
You and Rachel George, Jerry Sparrow and Crystal Sparrow. One of the conundrums, that mural was 7 years ago, and here we are 7 years later, and I understand Stanley Park Ecology Society didn't want to show the 5 murals together in the park, and I imagine the issue was it showed images that the commissioner, the Stanley Park Ecology Society, was uncomfortable with. Can you just our last question, how did that make you feel, and how, what do you think is the remedy for that in terms of what's the lesson for the settler groups that are trying to engage with Tsleil-Waututh and Musqueam and Squamish about their presence on the land, but at the same time they didn't seem ready to actually follow through and do the real work, which is difficult work. It's acknowledging that colonialism exists, that tankers threaten your culture, tankers threaten your food security, tankers threaten us all collectively, and having those difficult stories of residential schools and tankers and harm is part of our story. It's part of your story to be told.
Mm-hmm. When we were working so hard to protect our inlet, we're called Tsleil-Waututh means people of the inlet. Before contact, there was people of the river, people of the plains, the human beings of the inlet. That's how we refer to ourselves. We are the human beings, and the name Indian or Native North America, First Nations are all tags, but I was told at a very young age we're the human beings. And my dad used to say we're the only human beings who knows where the center of the earth is, knows the reason for our existence, and that is our heart and our love of one another and of the land. That's how he saw it, and that's how I was taught, and that's how I believe that we're all one people right across Turtle Island. Each tribe on Turtle Island, they're fighting mines, dams, and of course the big black snake, the pipelines. I think if we join together, I think we'd be a force to be reckoned with. If all the tribes join together and sent their representatives, and we might be able to at least stop the pipelines. And I think quite a few people are backing us up against the mega tankers. They want to dig 50 feet into our inlet so they could bring in mega oil tankers taller than the tallest Vancouver building and step up the production, sending it through. But it seems like the price of oil has gone so far down, who they're going to sell it to in the end. So I think it is with Joe Biden, who is probably going to be the president. He wants to clean up the air, land, and waters, which means no fossil fuels. So Canada's kind of worried if he gets in, because who are they going to sell their oil, their dirty, toxic tar sands oil to?
You talked a lot about, you talked about people uniting, and you talked about tribes in the States and First Nations in Canada collaborating and sharing. And I think, do you have a message for the artists in Vancouver and the arts communities, the museums, the galleries? What can we do to lift up that work that you're carrying, and that work that Ronnie is carrying and others are carrying? How can we be of service and support?
I think the more artistry that's out, be it in carvings, oil paintings, and movies, the more we're representative, then our faces in our art, we won't be so invisible and living in a fog in our own country like we're non-existent. And I think that's where the art culture can help out, is keep on putting it out there. I think it's a shame it's been 7 years since this beautiful art was done, and the majority of the people don't even know about it. They've never been told about it. They never saw it. And now one of the elders has passed on. The art world got a lot to do with people are interested in art, and they'll travel to look at it and buy it. And so I think it can contribute a lot.
Okay. Thank you, Ta'a.
Yeah.
I'm just going to ask everybody to unmute, and you can say your own thank you to Ta'a. There's lots of people on the call here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Gloria.
Majka, thank you, Ta'a.
Nice, many languages, Ta'a.
Oh, I see.
So we're all thinking of you, and I hope you get over your cold.
Yeah, it's
And-
miserable.
And I'll come see you soon.
Okay.
Much
Thank
love.
you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye. So, so nice to hear Ta'a's voice. All right. Big.
If you mind, Irwin, I just wanted to add something really quick.
Please.
Thanks. Yeah, so just kind of going off what Ta'a was saying, is that I think a lot of these stories of the land are not told, they're not known by settlers, right? Like we all have to learn our stories, hard or good, right? Like we learn all sides, all stories, and yet I feel like a lot of the times settlers aren't interested in learning the actual hard truth of this land, or they learn it and they don't pass it on. And you know, I go and do a lot of different events, and I tell these hard truths and these really hard stories, and I want those people that I talk to pass that on, to continue to teach. Like I think what Ronnie was saying in the beginning, about these different places, or Sanak, the story of Sanak, right? These are important things to know if you are going to live here. These happen right under our feet, sorry. And, you know, a lot of people think that a lot of the bad things happened back east, right? But I mean, we had several residential schools within 50, 60 kilometers of Vancouver. I mean, there was one right in North Van where my family went, where I have a lot of hard stories, right? So anytime I walk in North Van, I'm thinking of not just the good stories of my ancestors, but also the hard ones. And I think as people, if we are going to start actually addressing redress, right, that we need to actually learn both sides, right? The hard and the good.
I agree. And I also think that the whole thing with the spes and the murals comes back to that idea of who is seen to be the gatekeepers or the caretakers and the deciders of what is culture, what can and can't be seen, you know, the parameters of that, the fact that, you know, certain people get to decide how these calls are made, you know, and what can be visible and not visible. So that's a lot of the core of the problem, let alone, you know, the erasure of those stories and the harm that that caused to the artists who were involved. And I do really want to acknowledge Melanie for, you know, the approach that she took, you know, as the artist who was hired to do that mural, that she then took it upon herself to reach out to the nations, to work with the youth and the elders, and to make sure that those stories of that place were known. And I'm sorry that there's the continued, you know, that those stories still aren't being visible and shared as they were intended to. And I know that, you know, eventually a few of them are now going to be back where they were supposed to go on the building. But meanwhile, many years of that erasure and that harm have been done.
Thank you for that analysis. And here's another example where a mural in Victoria last week is considered by the Victoria Police Chief to be offensive, right? And ACAB was written on the mural, this unity mural that dealt with the realities of Black and Indigenous folk in Victoria. And the police chief didn't like the fact that, difficult truths were there. And then it was graffitied again. This was the artist's response. This letter has been censored by the City of Victoria, influenced by the Victoria Police Department. In doing so, Victoria is contributing to the silencing of Black and Indigenous voices and experiences across this land only because of one letter in a mural. And then that was graffitied last Saturday at 10 a.m. in the morning. So these are not historical issues, these are contemporary issues. The question for our last breakout group, we're going to jump into it right now. How do we confront these difficult truths? And how can we as a sector wide bring accountability? How can we hold each other? How can we lift each other up? How can we support the accountability issue? But really the question is, how can we as a sector advance and repair this invisibility on the land? So I'm sort of jumbling a few things there, but I think the sentiment, the question really is, if we can take 10 to 15 minutes, how can we as a community, and I think we are a community, because I've seen many of you in the group there, we are a community, we're colleagues, we're peers, we're friends, we're people we know, we're organizations in the cultural sector, and we're trying to do right. So how can we collaborate? How can we work as a community so that we're not just watching these single events happen or someone is doing something over there? How can we work together as a community to advance the redress? Any feedback on the question? Is a good question we can discuss?
Great question. Not a lot of time.
Not a lot of time.
Yeah, I can see some people might have to leave, no worries. But yeah, we are recording this too, so hopefully we can all look back on it. So yeah, I'm going to send you guys to your breakout rooms.
In the interest of time, let's dive back in as people rejoin us. And Sandra, do you want to report back?
Sure. Yep. Yeah, I am on. So there were a number of elements in discussion in our group. One of the things that stuck out for me was to embrace bold action. And one of our concluding thoughts was about the importance of engagement and collaboration, because a different kind of energy emerges when people are working together. And then Ronnie's comment about situating the hard things in ceremony. Again, if we are working together in collaboration and situating ourselves in ceremony, I think mighty things can happen.
Thank you, Sandra. And thanks, Ronnie, for those ideas around bold action as well, and ceremony that you're pointing to, Sandra.
Our group, we had a lot to talk about, but mainly is kind of approaching redress and repair has to be personal as well as institutional. And that the bottom line is basically we have to listen and pass on the messages, and to listen mainly because we're not going to be the ones who are going to make decisions in the end if everything goes well, and because Indigenous sovereignty means that the Indigenous people have their say on the land in the end. But yeah. If anyone from my group wants to add on to that, basically it's a culmination of our thoughts.
I can jump in with a report from Megan and Carol and myself. We were just looking at the need for different strategies from different sized organizations, and to acknowledge that safety within an organization needs to be addressed before hiring in Indigenous folks to work in colonial structures, and that there needs to be real context created for protocol and community engagement and support to avoid isolating Indigenous leaders within colonial institutions and then placing the burden of success on poorly planned projects on their shoulders, but also to transmit the knowledge around appropriate protocols for when stories and learnings should be shared and when they are appropriate to be held within a particular sharing context. So the conversation focused a lot on planning so that there isn't harm done in the process of attempting to redress.
Savannah?
I can maybe speak
Go
to that.
ahead.
Our group also spoke to some of those issues that Heidi mentioned in terms of creating safer spaces for Indigenous practitioners and more broadly BIPOC artists, and some of the groundwork that maybe arts administrators, programmers, whoever you are, needs to kind of do inward facing with your group, like take a hard look at who's actually engaged, who's your staff, who's your volunteers, and are they able to contribute to fostering a safe space? I think Sobi mentioned, if your group is less than 50% BIPOC, then you're not really actually able to foster a safe space. So how do you do that? And we talked about, creating, internal trainings, but ways of relationship building with each other that could increase accountability and learning for people to do that own work before you're inviting, more marginalized, quote unquote, people and potentially causing harm that is, is going to push people away from doing work with your organization and with your arts group. I don't know if other people want to add on to that, but thanks.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly add, one of the grants that we're applying for from Vancouver Foundation is a BIPOC grant that seeks to lower the many barriers, for applying for these grants. And that's the first time I've seen anything like that. I think that is an opportunity also just to input on what further needs to happen to lower those barriers. And I think we should push for that in all kind of arts grants.
Thanks, Sobi. Savannah, I think I saw your hand.
Yes, Savannah from Vancouver Moving Theatre in the heart of the City Festival. Just a couple very short comments, looking at how it's really about how do you learn to live together and use public space together. And I was wondering about, could there be a project where all the arts organizations throughout the city develop banners that had Indigenous place names on it of where their practice is located or the community that they're living in. And if, that's something that if all the different organizations were doing in their own way, in their home communities, would increase visibility. I just wanted to share that thought.
Hi, our group talked a lot about relationship building and making sure that the thoughts and the processes and the discussion really comes from Indigenous voices, that we're not continuing to frame the structure in terms of I've got this spot on a board or I've got this, staff position and I need to fill it with, and telling, what needs to happen. So I think that was, part of what was very meaningful or profound about what we were talking about. And it's really about going beyond, what some of us felt was sort of what we were doing now is having, opening up positions on a board or expecting people to build our capacity without having that reciprocal kind of relationship where we're benefiting, the person individually. We're always sort of expecting that work to be done for us. So Charlene, Sharon, Amy, I don't know if you have anything else to add. I wasn't taking notes. Thank you for the talk, though.
And that comes up a lot, the issue of indigenizing versus decolonizing, right? Or as David Eng talked about, these kinds of gestures of token equity positions without actually looking at the structure and the political economy of the organization. Amy?
I will add one thing. So one point was also just set a goal within the organizations, because actions come from goal setting sometimes.
Okay. We've got a couple minutes left.
Sorry, Irwin.
One thing we did speak to was definitely the need for community engagement when we talk about things like redress, thinking about how we reframe that question to ask ourselves, what is it that Indigenous nations, what is it that Indigenous communities want and need, and moving forward from there, and that being the foundation of that work.
All right. Any, Ronnie and Kamala, if you want to, you shared quite a bit earlier, which really set this in motion. If you want to kind of provide any additional thoughts, or now that you've heard the group speaking, do you want to just leave it open for you if you want to share? You're welcome to.
Thank you. It's just great to be in circle with everyone, even virtual circle. And I guess I just hope that we all continue to ourselves think about our responsibilities and our relationships to, as Ronnie says, land, water, stars, and also how we are contributing to a rethinking of the dominant narratives and stories that surround us and the harms that they cause, and how we are contributing to supporting the relationships that the rights and title holders of wherever we may live, if it's not our ancestral territories, how we can support those relationships and be part of those good relations going forward. So hi for including me in this really important conversation.
Thanks for sharing your time.
I'm really thinking about this, like, for us to reach the space of a regenerative economy for the arts and for our own movements of sovereignty for our communities, we have to really look at a large conscious shift in the way that the dominant populace understands this relationship between Indigenous people and settlers, but also our relationship to land and the way that we look at these things. When I was in San Francisco, 2018, I got to work with an organization called the Center for Story-Based Strategy, and they use story elements to really understand how are we going to shift the spectrum of allies by using story. We're woven together by stories as human beings. We're hardwired for narrative. And there's a quote, I forget who it's by, but it says that no one's ever marched on Washington because of a pie chart. We have all this analysis and all this data that we throw at each other, and it's not going to get people to take to the streets or to be able to activate. We really need to look at us as artists, storytellers, and knowledge keepers to arm ourselves with the most optimal way to translate these difficult stories. I keep saying that difficult stories need ceremony, and arts is the ceremony in which we can begin to shift the spectrum of allies and speak to hearts and not ears. I could spit dates. I could tell you my saddest stories, and I don't know if it's going to make the hardest supremacists change their minds. We have to understand that this machine in which white supremacy is the engine is overtaking not only humankind, but the lands and the relationship. And how do we tell that difficult story without having eyes roll or arms crossed and completely losing our audience and creating more resentment and division? Is up to us to have these conversations as communities to be able to activate this knowledge, the histories, these new mythologies based from our old wisdoms and what's been passed down to us. And to really identify and acknowledge and recognize those who are already going towards this work, and that each and every one of us is kind of paddling in that direction, but it's been out of survival since the floods, since the great flood, since the fire, since smallpox, through all these things, we're running and trying to just carry what we have left. And I really do believe in the idea of being able to shift the dominant narrative by using stories. And I shared a link in here from the Center for Story-Based Strategy. I enjoy their work. I got to sit with them and really watch them work. It's run by women of color, based out of Oakland. And you guys know Oakland's pretty awesome. I hope maybe you guys can enjoy some of that. And maybe if we do a cost sharing thing where they come and teach us some stuff, I think we could, a lot of us, our organizations, our nations, our communities could benefit from getting our story straight, because we're up against a huge ignorance, and fascism has a huge marketing budget, and we're watching that happen in real time as we speak. We're all going to go and check the news to see how that marketing budget is working after this. So that's all. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for your contribution, Ronnie, and informing so much of this work. I just want to thank everybody. I threw the email address in there if you have any feedback. And I've also saved the chat. We'll do a follow-up email and we'll post this video. Yeah, and just want to thank the Heart of the City Festival as well for the support, and the SFU Institute for Humanities. If we did a territorial acknowledgement, we would have mentioned that SFU is on stolen land and continues to sell Burnaby Mountain and make millions of dollars of profit while still charging Coast Salish students tuition fees. So I think UBC and SFU are equally deplorable, but the SFU Institute for Humanities stands against that, and want to be mindful also that the fight against the Kinder Morgan pipeline expansion, the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion, is going to be taking over a lot of Burnaby Mountain over the next few weeks. So to be mindful of that, Will George and the Slahal Tuth are inviting folks to the Watch House, and the Watch House is a perfect manifestation of the face on the land, and the Watch House is something that we can all support as well. Thank you again. Wish you a good day, and let's do this again. Let's unmute. You can unmute yourselves, and we can all say goodbye.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you to Kamala and Ronnie.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.